We're ready.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure how many people are here, but I want to thank you for joining me today, for having me with you today. As Bobby said, my name is Rich Gallego. I live in the high desert northeast of Los Angeles, and it's been a real wonderful place for me to live because I have access to some of my favorite places to paint. I do a lot of plein air painting for my reference material specifically, and I've got the backside of the San Gabriels, which have cottonwood trees and sycamores, and in the fall they're just gorgeous. I'm also in fairly close proximity to the Mojave Desert and the California Poppy Reserve and Eastern Sierra, so I don't have to go too far afield to find some beautiful things to paint. Today, what I'm going to be doing is showing you the process. Now, it's a 16 by 20, and it's probably a little unrealistic to think that I'm going to finish this in an hour and a half, especially when I'm trying to impart information to you. But I'm going to show you my process, and hopefully it'll be something you find interesting and useful. And as Bobby said, I welcome any questions. I'm okay if you just ask them. It might be easier if you do them through chat if too many people are asking at one time, but we'll see how that develops. And yeah, it's going to be an oil demonstration. I normally would have had a camera on my palette, and I'm sorry to disappoint you from the outset. That's not going to happen today. It had some technical issues, but I use a very limited palette anyway. I use titanium white, cad red light, cad lemon, and ultramarine. And then depending what I'm painting, I might add a cad orange or chromatic black. And for those of you who are not familiar with chromatic black, and forgive me, I really have no idea what level of experience any of you have. I assume there could be somebody who's professional and somebody who's kind of at the beginning of this journey. So forgive me if I state some obvious things. Chromatic black is, as the name suggests, not a true black. It's a mix of phthalocyan emerald and quinacridone red. So it's a very dark transparent green and a very dark transparent red. And it's very useful in making natural looking.
You know, zero.
I'm sorry? Well, I thought somebody asked a question. Sorry.
No, I think we're just not muted, and I'm looking, but thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, that's what we're going to start with. I'm going to do a scene that I painted a field study from last spring. It's not too far from where I live, and in the hills near in Santa Clarita area near Placerita Canyon State, I guess it's County Natural Park, and it's just rolling hillsides with some scrub oaks and some flowers. We always get a few poppies, maybe a little bit of lupin, and a whole lot of mustard. So in the springtime, it gets really pretty. So I'm going to go ahead and start that up here. What I normally start for, some people are attracted to color. And it's not that I am not attracted to color, but for some reason, shapes are the things that usually get my attention first. And so I feel like if I have a dominant shape, whether it's a dark against a light field or the other way around, if I have a dominant shape, that creates visual impact that is noticeable from across the room. And so the paintings are likely to be seen. And for those of you who are, by the way, doing competitions or anything like that, or you're submitting work for shows, if you do a thumbnail of them and see if the no-tan version, the black and white version, has a dominant shape, that's usually a pretty good tip that the person judging the show is gonna see that visual impact, and so that graphic impact, and it bodes well for being judged into the shows, I find. So anyway, I usually look for 4 to 7 basic shapes that work well together. And what I mean by work well together is that they're varied, they're different sizes, different angles. I don't have a perfectly rectangular sky shape, that sort of thing. And then I think about rhythm a lot. And forgive me, I'm kind of going on a diatribe here, but I'm just trying to get some of the things out of the way that I'm going to be covering. When I talk about rhythm in paintings, as I was telling Bobby a little earlier, my career before I became a serious painter was I did 30 years in a laboratory doing cancer research. So I have a science background, and I tend to think of things in those terms. And one of the things that I know is that asymmetric rhythms, whether it's in music or in painting, they tend to gather more attention from your viewer and at a deeper level than say a common time sort of thing. If you can think about music, those of you who play piano or any other instrument, if you have common time, which is 4 beats per measure, it kind of sounds like bum, 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 bum. It's very uniform. Syncopated rhythms, asymmetric rhythms, like you find in jazz and some classical music, it sounds like bum, 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 bum. It's very irregular. And what that does is it actually triggers certain centers in your brain to engage, as I said, on a deeper level and for a longer period of time. Translation, it's more interesting. And for me, I'm going to try and use everything I can to get viewers to spend time with my paintings instead of, glancing at them and moving on. So I pay particular attention to rhythm, and it might be the spaces between tree trunks. It could be the spaces between, fence posts, light objects against dark objects, making sure that they're not equidistantly spaced because it just isn't as interesting to people. The other thing that I will sometimes do, if I can, is use a concept called peak shifting. Imagine you have a rock that's kind of a triangular shape, and it's fairly the same, dimensions on each side. And that might be the way it looks in nature. So you think, well, I'm going to paint it that way. Problem is, it's uniform and not terribly interesting. So I'll change the aspect ratio. I'll make one side considerably longer than it really is. And just making that shape more irregular and exaggerated does the same thing as far as how our brains engage. It makes it more interesting. So I'll do that sort of thing. I look at the natural world as reference material, and I want it to look believable and organic, but I'm not interested in painting a photograph. So it's kind of fun when somebody says to me, oh, it looks just like a photograph. They don't know everything that's gone into it. And over time, I've come to believe that that just means they believe it. They might not have the vocabulary to express it quite right, but it means they're buying into what I've painted here. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start laying out my composition. And like I said, if there's any questions, please feel free. I'm going to change this a little bit so that you can see the canvas a little better. Is that working for you guys? Is that taking up enough space on the screen? Okay. And you can't really see it, but one of the things I do, that chair that I was just sitting in while I was talking to you, I leave that in front of my easel to make sure that I don't get too close to it, because it helps me make sure that I'm staying at arm's distance away and I'm painting from the shoulder and not from the wrist, so to speak. Okay, so I'm going to establish, I don't ever want to start a line right at the corner. And I tell people this all the time as well, especially when I have students, if I'm teaching a workshop or something. Every painting I've ever done has looked horrible at some point. And it's just the process, nothing to be worried about. I find people tend to judge their own work way too soon. I believe in massing in. You'll rarely see me do any kind of line drawings. And one of the reasons is that in an effort to keep my studio work looking hopefully as fresh as my plein air stuff, I like to keep as much of the same process as possible. And of course, when you're painting outdoors and the light's changing very quickly, there's not a lot of time to do a bunch of line drawing.
Rich, are you working from a reference photo or memory or a combination?
I'm working from a reference painting, actually. And it's a square format. And I'm going to do a rectangle this time, but this isn't finished. this is just, like I said, a field study. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. And that's the other thing, when I go out to paint outdoors, plein air, I'm really just focusing on trying to gather information, and I'm not so concerned with coming out with a finished, frameable, saleable painting. And that will sometimes happen, but basically I'm just looking to gather information. And a lot of times, again, because of my science background, I tend to be very literal. And so it works better for me if I go out and, like I said, just gather information, even if I don't finish it. As soon as I get enough, shapes and color notes, it sometimes is better if I just bring it home at that point and finish it in the studio, because I can get too married to the scene in front of me, and next thing you know, I'm doing this photorealistic painting that I can't stand. So I know there are people who, can paint very loosely in the field, but I think it's important to know thyself, and my scientific leanings always make things too literal. So I find it works best if I do it this way. Just get what I need and take it home, work from that. One of the things you may notice right from the start is you've got two different masses here. This one is going to be dominant, but already I'm making sure that there's variety. They're different basic shapes, and they'll change as the painting goes on. But, for the most part, this will stay somewhat triangular, and this will stay somewhat more boxy, rectangular, or square. And it's because I want to imbue the painting with variety any chance I can. And then the other thing is that rhythm thing I was talking about. The distance from the edge of the canvas to the beginning of this dark shape is maybe 1.5 inches. The next light distance is significantly more, and then there's no space over here between this one and the edge. Now that's a pretty simple example of it, but if I had them both placed, 3 inches from the edge of the canvas, it would not feel the same. It would feel like it was being, too contrived. Okay, now I'm going to look at that, get that background hill mass in. And again, this stage of the painting, I'm not terribly concerned with getting the color perfect. I want to get my values established and get my shapes arranged where I want them. Because this is all, this is basically a block in, and most of it's going to get covered up eventually with subsequent layers of paint. But you'll be able to see the way it develops at least. And one of the things that I try to do is I use a fairly large brush for as long as I can. In this case, this is a number 10 long flat from Rosemary and Company. And there are times when I might use this brush for an entire painting. Because I really believe that if you take the time to see all the different marks that a brush can make by using different facets of it, making different strokes, they're really remarkable tools. That, and I don't like carrying a lot of equipment out in the field with me, so typically I won't have any more than maybe 4 brushes with me, and 2 of them won't get used. So again, forgive me if I say something that's so rudimentary to you, but again, I don't know everybody's experience level. And if there are any absolute beginners, I don't want to leave them behind. So this bluish color back here, this mountain, which by the way is chromatic black and white. It ends up looking fairly chromatic, even though it's a black. I want to put this in because I'm establishing depth. The cools recede. These warmer colors, even though there's hardly anything here, they obviously are going to advance. So I'm already establishing some depth and distance. Now, ideally, if I do this right, when I start a painting, I said earlier, I try to find 4 to 7 basic shapes. And the reason I pick 4 and 7 is because fewer than 4 tends to have and there may be exceptions, but fewer than 4 basic shapes, you're going to end up with a painting that doesn't have a lot of interest in it. It's just a little boring. More than 7, it can get a little bit busy. So if I look at this one, my ground plane is 1 shape. This is 2. This is 3. This background mountain is 4. There'll be mid-ground shapes that are a bit lighter than this. That's 5. And then your sky shape is 6. There's going to be some clouds. So at the most, that's 7 right there. And the thing that people sometimes have problems with when they start out is organizing everything. It seems like there's so much out there that they're looking at. It's hard to keep track of it. But if you squint and identify shapes by their values, and then you simplify, and by that I mean get rid of any extraneous shapes that aren't going to further your narrative. You know, if we're trying to say, well, I love the yellow flowers that are on this hill and the way they contrasted with these dark green scrub oaks, then do I really need, you know, some other little tree that's in the midground that's bright orange? I don't need that. It interferes with the narrative. So you want to get rid of everything that doesn't serve your purposes and keep only the essentials. One of the things that I tell my students is simple is powerful. Simplistic is a whole other thing. Simplistic means you have not taken the time to find the essence of the scene. You haven't taken the time to edit out the extraneous. Simple means you have done that and you've diluted it down to its essence. And that's where you're going to get a more powerful statement.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, the difference between, here, let me get my, I don't want to be the disembodied voice. The difference between simple and simplistic. Simple is a good thing in painting because what it means is you've looked at your scene, and it doesn't matter if it's a landscape or figurative work or still life, you've looked at it and you've edited out all of the extraneous, the unnecessary, everything that's not going to serve your intent. Simple means, so that's getting rid of that, and it leaves only the essence. That's what provides the power, the impact. Simplistic is when you don't bother to do that and you paint everything that you see. And what happens is people get lost looking at extraneous things that don't serve the narrative that you intended. So simple's good, simplistic bad.
Do you figure out the narrative first? Do you make a conscious decision on that?
Well, so that's another interesting thing. I was once told that very early on, somebody told me that the problem with my paintings was that they didn't have a particular narrative. Well, this was somebody that collected art that was historic in nature, like historic scenes, Washington crossing the Delaware, that kind of stuff. As a landscape painter, I decided, and you know, you guys can all figure out for yourself whether you think this is valid or not, but I decided a long time, my narrative is always the same. And that is, God put a beautiful world in front of us. And it's my job to tell people, look what's here. Forgive me if I go off track for a minute. I believe beauty is a very, very important thing in our life. And it's underappreciated. I think life is very hard. And if people stopped and appreciated all the beautiful scenes that there are, it makes their lives easier. I know it does mine. So that's my narrative. I'm painting things that are beautiful. I'm trying to find beauty in things sometimes that are mundane. But yeah, that's always my narrative.
Excellent answer. Excellent answer. Thank you.
Sure. So I'm going to go up into the sky here for a moment and get my cloud pattern established. And once again, this is chromatic black, just with a lot more white than down here. I started using chromatic black because I was looking at the work of Anders Dorn, and he had a very, very modified muted palette, and I was unable to find all the exact same colors, but I was able to use a modified Zorn palette that doesn't have any blue, and it doesn't have a real yellow. So I painted for a long time with a palette that was just, instead of blue, it was chromatic black. Instead of yellow, it was yellow ochre, and then cad red medium and titanium white. And boy, when you do that, you think, well, it's hard to get any impactful color, and that's true. But what it allows you to do is focus on painting values accurately. And then if you do a painting in that, severely limited palette, and then at the end you go back and you add pops of color somewhat judiciously where they're going to be impactful, it's amazing how well it works out. And I would encourage any painter to do an experiment with that and see what it looks like. Left way. Is there anybody watching today who has disdain for doing color charts? Or is that everybody?
I do not disdain color charts. I do find them a little more complicated.
Yeah.
When I try them, but I like to see when other people do it. So
Yeah.
feel free to include it.
Well, the only reason that I bring it up is because I've been telling students to do it for a long time, and almost nobody does because they feel that they're going to feel too tedious or whatever. And I get it. People want to paint, but, and I thought the same thing until I started doing them. And I actually enjoy doing them because, if you're doing it because you're trying to find a particular color and what the formula is for it, then I guess it could seem rather frustrating and tedious. But if you take certain colors, say you just assemble a bunch of different greens and a bunch of different blacks and do a chart, and you have no idea, you're not looking for anything specific, you're just trying to see, how do they turn out? And I got to tell you, it's actually a lot more fun than one might think, and very useful.
I work in watercolor, Rich, and that was the first thing that my teacher had told me to do, to learn my palette.
Yeah.
And I still have that. I made it like a little 5x7 flip chart of everything on my palette, and I still refer to it looking for the right green or.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to see if I have mine are all kind of tucked away, but just looking at a few things the other day with a student on mine, it was one with, like I said, with some different greens and different yellows and that sort of thing. And, like I said, you think that it's going to be kind of tedious, but it's so useful. And it's actually I found it more enjoyable than one might expect.
Well, you always know what blue and red are going to make purple.
Sure, yeah. But there's so many subtle varieties. Is it a little warmer? Is it a little cooler? Is it more transparent? Is it more opaque? That kind of thing. And you get to learn all those things when you do them. So the other thing that I ask people to do is to take an old piece of cardboard, something you don't care about, and practice making a bunch of different types of strokes with each of the brushes that you have. And because a lot of people, I see them picking up a little liner brush to make a telephone wire or something. And then I'll pick up a number 10 like this and do the same mark. And they don't realize that if you have, the brush in good condition, you can make anything. But for me, I'd rather not have to stop and get 17 different brushes when I'm trying to paint. Okay. Now I've got this mid-ground area that I want to get into. And again, right now I'm just blocking in shapes. enough? But already, I think you can see that there's depth. I'm trying to make sure that my composition is balanced. And by balanced, I don't mean just balanced left to right, top to bottom, but we have to also, if we're trying to make this believable as something that's, I mean, it's an illusion, but we want to make it look three-dimensional. It has to be balanced from foreground to background as well. And that's something that a lot of people neglect. And so what I will be doing before this is done is getting some darks. Now, they're relative darks, not going to be as dark as these things in the foreground, but there'll be some darker trees way back here. And that'll help take the weight off of the foreground and tilt it back to more of an even situation. Okay, now this foreground, it's basically a lot of dirt and sparse grasses, and then I'll come in at the end with some wildflowers. But basically, first thing I need to do is just get some cover on here. And this is all very thin. The other thing, do you guys all hear this? You hear that scratching sound? Anybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So that became very important to me when I was learning how to do this, because it's different things for different people, but when I'm blocking in, you're going to hear that scratching sound, and it's the bristles against the canvas, obviously. But once the blocking is done and I'm laying other subsequent layers of paint down, they should be silent, because at that point, instead of approaching it with the brush basically at a right angle to the canvas, I'm going to be loading the brush up just at the tips of the bristles, and I'll be laying it on top. And so unless I'm trying to mix with some prior layer of paint, most of the time there will be, the brush bristles will never touch the canvas after this stage. There will always be a layer of paint between the bristles and the canvas, so it'll be much more silent. And the reason I bring that up is there are times when people have trouble mixing color. They can't figure out why their colors look muddy when they get them on the canvas. They don't look that way on their palette. And what they don't realize is that they're pushing, secondary layers of paint into primary layers of paint, and they're contaminating the color because they're just not applying it in an effective way. Does that make sense?
Not quite.
Okay, so let me show you real quickly, because it's kind of I think it's an important thing to note. If I'm going to mix up a green and put it in here, can you see where the paint is on the brush?
Yes.
There's a bead of paint right at the tips of the bristles. There's never paint down by the ferrule. I don't ever want to get paint there because it's harder to clean out, and eventually the bristles get splayed, and paint that's back in this part of the brush is never going to get to the canvas anyway. Now, the way I pick the paint up is when I've got a puddle of paint on my palette, there's a tongue twister. Instead of picking it up like this, like a lot of people would, I put the brush at a low angle and I move it back and forth, side to side, as I advance it. And what happens is you pick up a bead of paint like that. You can see there's a little ridge of paint there. Now, when I go to apply that, you heard the scratching part, right? When I go to apply subsequent layers of paint, it'll sound like this. Now, notice now I'm at a low angle to the canvas, and it's quiet. So if I'm further into the painting and I start hearing that scratch, that means I'm getting lazy with my brushwork, and I have to kind of recollect myself and start doing it right.
So I have another question, and
Sure.
I understand the scratchy better now, but when I try to put a dark color over a light color, it gets muddy and dilutes the dark, and it doesn't add anything to the painting. It detracts everything. I
You're
know
painting,
that we were taught to go dark to light, not go light to dark.
right? Yeah, if you're using oil or acrylic, you want to go dark to light, and you won't have nearly that much of a problem. But it is possible to put dark over light. You just have to have plenty of paint and a very light touch, and you have to lay it right on top and not push it in at all. And
Got it.
honestly, in situations like that, I usually find it's easier to wipe off and go in with fresh, lighter paint.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because, and it's funny, you know, and I'm including myself in this because I've been guilty of it. Sometimes we painters just get lazy, and instead of wiping off, I'll, you know, just try to lay it on top. And it's like, well, you know, it takes a few moments longer to wipe a passage off and start over again, and it'll work a lot better. But there you are trying to, you know, massage it into what's already there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not the only one that's ever done that. Okay, so I'm going to start getting some contour out of this hillside by going a little bit darker back here, because this hillside kind of came up and then rolled over. And you hear the scratches because I'm on pretty much bare canvas over here. Again, for the purposes of expediency, I toned this canvas right before we started. Normally I would do that as part of the demo, but I wanted to have it ready to go. And I don't like to tone them, you know, a day ahead or a week ahead, because I like it to be wet when I start working into it. You may or may not find that useful, but that's the way I approach it. Okay, now up here in the sky. Thank you, Mom.
You're welcome. Are you guys
We
going
see
now or
this
what?
sort of a light blue-gray color. And it could read as a sky itself, you know, without any clouds in it, just not terribly brilliant. But if I go ahead and get some ultramarine and mix up a nice bright sky color, now these grays they become the cloud matter. And as I go from lower in the sky to higher in the sky, even if there's clouds obscuring part of it, my blue has to get darker. That may be a little too much of a leap, but I can adjust it. And so what you have, you end up with cloud masses that are made sort of, you know, by negative painting, by having put that gray wash in to begin with. Is that showing up okay on the camera?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, anytime I'm painting a sky with clouds in it, just like any shape in any painting, I want to make sure that something is dominant, either the light or the dark. I don't want a 50-50 proposition. And sometimes people will think, oh, it's, you know, it's not 50-50 because it's not half and half, but it's a percentage kind of a thing. If I have 50% of the sky with blue holes, you know, patches coming through, and 50% of it gray clouds, it still feels too, what's the word I'm looking for? It's too balanced, and it starts to feel contrived. Now that can happen in nature, but I just find it's better to make sure that one or the other dominates. So I may put this holes over here and then some smaller ones over here to make sure that there's more gray in the sky than blue. And I'm not done with that by any means. The other thing I like to do is I won't work on any one section of the painting for too long a period of time. Maybe a couple of minutes, 3 minutes at most, before moving on to somewhere else. And the reason for that is I don't ever want, you know, whatever part I'm working on, I'm looking at, especially if I'm out in the field, you know, looking at it from nature, whatever I'm looking at becomes my focal point for the moment. So if this is supposed to be my focal area in here, and it's going to end up being these wildflowers at the base and this dark, you know, scrub oak. But if while I'm looking at this and painting this cloud, for the moment, that becomes my focal point. And if I paint it with the same amount of information and suggestion of detail as I do down here, you're going to end up with some tension, and the viewer's not going to know what they're supposed to look at. So I try to bounce around from one section to another, knowing that I'm going to come back around to the others again. And this way I can keep the balance that I want, and I can make sure that this doesn't become, you know, too interesting and start detracting from this. And I do that with all of it. You know, you get looking at something for a while, and you just start focusing on it too much, and it starts having too much importance.
Is this the kind of the simple versus simplistic?
Well, yeah. So let me, okay, we're going to sidetrack for a minute, but again, I think it's important.
Sorry.
So if you know somebody, or if you are someone who paints from photographs, and I'm not knocking that, there are people who can do it very well, and it's a great way to start. I think that you need to get outside if you're doing landscapes, paint from, you know, the figure from life. If you're doing figurative work, the problem with photographs is they see and record everything with the same level of detail, the same edge quality. Okay, but that's not how we see the world. You know, pick an object on your wall and stare at it, and then identify the things in your peripheral vision without looking away from that initial object. You'll see them, but not with the same clarity and definition.
Oh, yeah.
As the thing you're looking at. Okay, so if my focal point is right in here, and I paint everything with the same edge quality, the same amount of chroma, just like I would if I was working from a photograph, everything is going to be the same quality all across, left to right, top to bottom. And it makes it hard for people to know where they're supposed to be focusing, number one. And number two, there's, you know, a lot of people, they won't know why, but it just doesn't feel authentic. And it's because that's not how we experience the world. That's the way a camera experiences the world. Make sense? Yeah. So one of the last things that I do with a painting is I go through, and on the periphery, I'll start softening edges where I think it's appropriate. Case in point, I'm just going to show you this real quickly. Make an example of it. If I've got this scrub oak over here, and I put a hard, dark edge on it right there. You see how it pulls your eye over there? And the converse of that is if I come back and I say, no, I'm going to soften that. I'm going to put a little complementary color in there so it's not so chromatic. It releases your eye to go back here. So when I'm designing a piece, I want to make sure that, yeah, I might lead you up this way and back this way and up here. If I do it right, I'll lead the viewer through the painting and have them stop where I want them to stop and go where I want them to go, and they'll never know that they're being manipulated. But you can do that by edge quality, by chroma. There's a hierarchy of things that our brains seek. The first is other humans. The second would be animals. After that, it would be man-made objects, hard edges, areas of high contrast, and high chroma. So you have to establish a hierarchy and decide where you're going to put those things. And again, I'm going to get out of sync a little bit. I want to make the point here. If I've got some of that mustard that was growing there that's brilliant yellow, as soon as I put that there, it grabs your attention, does it not? So if I did that same thing way over in this corner, there might be some yellow flowers there. But if I did the same thing, there's going to be tension. Do I look here? Do I look here? So if there's flowers here, that's fine. I'll mix up a yellow that's got a little bit of a lavender in it, so it's a little bit muted. And I can say, look, there's some yellow down there as well, but it's not fighting with this. So, you know, this way we get to decide where the viewer looks and in what order they look at certain areas.
I've seen and heard painters talk about the opposite color, like the blue in the background, a spot of orange somewhere in the painting, and there's actually supposed to be a name for what that's about. Are you familiar with that technique?
I use it a lot. I'm not sure what the actual name of it is, but it just has to do with, you know, using complementary color. And the way it works is if, so this mountain back here is essentially in the blue family. It's sort of a blue purple, sort of a lavender. So the complement of that would be something of an orange color, or red orange maybe. Now, if I mix a dark red orange, it's gonna, or too light, it's gonna pop out. But if I mix a red orange, that's, and I'm doing that right now, that's the same value as what I've already got established there. Do that right now. And we'll see, this is probably, that's a little too light. You can always take the complement of a color and mix it, you know, you're making the eye do the mixing. If I take this and say, I'm gonna put some of that right there, that's still too light. That's how you know you gotta do it. But I can put all kinds of different colors anywhere, and if they're the same value as what you put them into, they don't stand out shockingly, you know. Yeah, that's more it. So this is basically the same value, and I could put little flecks of it wherever I wanted. It's just, that's a little too light.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just using complementary color, and you don't want to overdo it, but I do it a lot in the sky. That's something I'll usually do toward the end. But it's like, if you ever looked at a painting of snow, you know, if it's done really well, there's not white. It's just a whole lot of different colors. It's pale turquoise and pale yellow and pale pink, and the value is always the same. So it doesn't look too disparate from the initial shape. See, I can subdue that a little bit, and I can leave that there, and maybe it's just a slightly warmer spot in that mountain, and it'll look, what it'll end up doing is giving it some contour and a little bit of sparkle. But essentially, whatever colors I use, there's always some complement in it. Now, the question is, am I going to mix it in so that it's a uniform color that's sort of desaturated, or am I going to leave them unmixed, and then you get that real impressionist sort of a feel to it? And that's up to, you know, the individual painters, obviously. All right, I'm going to go back into my trees. I haven't been there for a while. And I'm going to get some real dark darks in here. And start to give them some form. And you may notice when I'm doing this, I try to use a variety of brush strokes, because trees are not, you know, they're not rocks. They are a different texture, and they grow in all different directions. And so I find that if I twist the brush and push it and pull it, I get more variety, and it ends up feeling more believable. Now, I had the initial shapes that I wanted. So at this point, I'm just trying to figure out, where do I want recessed areas? And then I'll come back and add light to the areas that are stretching out toward the sky, the source of the light. But just by getting these darks in here, I start to get some contour and some depth in them. And then to just start to get a feeling of some of the light that's there, I'm going to take some cad lemon and chromatic black. And the thing about chromatic black, if you want to try it, if you haven't tried it before, as I said, it's a transparent dark red and a transparent dark green. So it's already got complementary colors. You don't have to go back and neutralize it. Mix it with yellow and you get a very natural looking yellow. So I have to decide how bright do I want this. It's an overcast day, so there may be room for a couple of bright areas, relatively bright areas where the sun's kind of peeking through. And again, you notice I'm using the corner of the brush and trying to keep it fairly random looking. But I don't want to, there's a temptation to have this bright yellow or green, really sunshiny thing. And, I do that if the situation calls for it, but especially with a lot of clouds in the sky, I want to get more of a subdued feel. And I think about what Winston Churchill said about painting when he said that it's like being in a war. You always want to keep something in reserve. So I try not to get this brilliant sunshiny thing going on my trees if there's not a good way to explain it, like a cloudless blue sky. And it's amazing how little value shift you need to start making it have contour and look believable.
We have a question in chat, and if anybody who does watercolor knows the answer, please type it in the chat. But do you know if there is a watercolor equivalent to chroma black?
Oh,
The
that's a good
chromatic black?
question. Yeah, no,
That-
I don't know if there is. I
There's a
painted gouache.
neutral, there's a something called neutral tint that is kind of a little bit like that. There are several blacks, a bunch of different types of blacks, but with watercolor, personally, I don't really use a lot of blacks. I use colors to make black because it's translucent, but you can use this neutral tint. It's a little tiny bit opaque, but it is, but it kind of, I think would do that same type of thing. If that answers your question.
Could you type that into the chat, Jolene, so we have a record of it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for chiming in, because I have no idea. I have a lot of respect for watercolorists. I think they're brave. But I paint in gouache quite a bit, but as you know, that's quite a bit different unless you really thin it out. I consider gouache, a water medium for those with a fear of commitment.
No way. Do you paint gouache like you paint the oils?
To an extent, yeah. I do. The only difference is my gouache pieces tend to be no bigger than 9 by 12.
Uh-huh.
And so I tend to get a lot more calligraphy and detail in those.
Do you teach a gouache class?
I've taught gouache classes in person. I haven't done one online yet. Yeah,
Okay.
and I've got, if anybody's interested in knowing what they look like, there's a gouache page on my website where you can see the stuff that I've done with it.
Is that Rich? How do you say it?
Yes, just richgallego.com.
Gallego.
Gallego. By the way, if
Richard, I muted you by accident. I'm sorry. I thought I was muting myself. Richard, can you hear me? I muted you by accident.
Gotcha. Sorry. Yeah, so Plein Air Magazine has a convention, a plein air convention. They try to do it every year. The pandemic kind of got in the way of it for a couple of years, but I'm going to be on the faculty in Santa Fe in May. It's the 17th through the 22nd, I believe. And so if you're interested in learning plein air or improving your plein air work, if you've never been to the convention, it really is a lot of fun. And I guess there's a debate to be had about whether your money is better spent there or paying for a specific workshop. And it's kind of up to you. I mean, you're going to get a lot of information at the convention from a lot of different artists. So sometimes that's a really good thing.
What was the date?
It's May 17th to the 22nd.
And it's
Yeah,
called
and
the Plein Air
the-
Convention?
Yeah, Plein Air Convention and Expo. Yeah, PACE, they call it PACE. That's the acronym for it. But it's a Plein Air Convention and Expo. And you can find all the details in the Plein Air magazine website or in the magazine itself. Yeah, it's a great time. And I love teaching people how to paint, especially out in the field. So if you're so inclined and you show up, please look me up and introduce yourselves. One of the best things about being a painter for me has been the people that I've met. I've made a lot of friends. I joke with my students that it's really just it's just a ploy to make more friends, because that's the way it always ends up. Right. So I think you can agree that this is starting to look like something here. A lot of work to be done, but so I'm going to go into the background. And remember, I was talking about balancing foreground and background earlier. So I'm going to go cooler with these, and they're obvious. So there's several ways. And again, folks, I keep saying this. I want to apologize if I'm saying things. I know some of you, these are very rudimentary and you learned these millions of years ago, but there may be somebody who doesn't know. There's several ways to establish depth and distance. There's obviously the whole, overlapping of forms. This tree is clearly in front of this mountain because it's obscuring that mountain, right? Same thing here and over here. There is the receding of chroma, where the cools recede and the warms advance. There's diminution of size, where things just get smaller as they go back. There is a lessening of contrast between light and shadow as you go into the distance. In other words, what would be light and shadow separation in the foreground ordinarily will be, you might see the shadows in something way back here that's small, but the light and the dark are going to be much closer to each other on the value scale. And then lastly, there's a softening of edges. And all of those things help us establish depth and distance. So right now we've got overlapping of forms, we've got the cools receding, the warms advancing. So these are going to be basically the same sort of trees for all anybody knows, but I need to make sure that the parts that are viewed as shadow especially have more blue in them, or at least are more cool than these up here. So now these are much smaller. So that tells you that they're way back in space. And if there's going to be any contrast, meaning some light on them, I'm going to make sure that the light that I put on top of these forms is also cooler than the light up here. And I don't know how well it shows up on the camera, but if you see it in person, if you're looking at it, you can see that there's shadow here and light up here, but they're much closer in the value scale than what's going on here. Also, the light here is cooler than the light here. And obviously, these are much smaller tree forms. And then the other thing is I've left a bit of a gap here. And that's just because, again, that rhythm thing, you've got a long dark, a short space, and then a somewhat dark that's not nearly as long. And all of those things help to establish a more interesting rhythm, even in something way back in the distance that people are barely paying attention to. I try to paint every square inch of every painting as well as I can. Now that's going to mean a different thing today than it does, 6 months from now. The better we get, obviously that bar changes. But if the goal is always to paint it as well as I can from corner to corner, edge to edge, I think that's a good way to keep myself honest and moving in the right direction. Okay, let me get back up into these clouds here. I want to get some more light up in the sky there. Here's my brush. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention. Anytime you look at a scene, I would hope people would recognize that there are a number of different possibilities as far as composition. And you don't have to stick with what's given. If any of you have ever read John Carlson's book on landscape painting, there's a line in there where he talks about, that nature doesn't leave perfect compositions lying around for, what did he call it, for sophisticated darlings to but step down, reach down and pick up. And it's an old book, and the verbiage is somewhat dated. But what he's saying is, when you go out in nature to paint from nature, don't expect the compositions to be handed to you on a silver platter. You got to move things around sometimes. You got to change things sometimes. So one of the things that I try to make, a point of is this idea of shape containment. And by that, what I mean is, if you look at this mass right here, okay, it is contained within this background hill. In other words, it doesn't break the ridge line. Whereas this one over here does break the ridge line. Now that accomplishes a couple of things. Because it makes it bigger, it helps establish it as the dominant form, more of the focal area. But the other thing is that it adds variety, and it makes it feel more natural, because in nature, you don't have things coming up to just below the ridge. Not all of them, something usually is above. So I like to make sure that there's some variety there. So this one doesn't come above the ridge line. This one breaks clean through it. This one barely breaks the ridge of this little hill that it's sitting on. And again, the spacing of them, not equidistant, right? This is syncopated rhythm. This is asymmetric rhythm. So all these things are going on in my head while I'm painting, trying to make sure that I'm making it as interesting and varied as I can. Although one could look at this and say, well, it's a pretty simple composition, but remember what I said earlier, simple can be powerful. And I know that most people, when they see one of my paintings, they have no idea, and it's not just me, I know other painters obviously have their processes also, but most people don't have any idea the thought that's gone into putting one of these together. And that's fine. I don't need them to, I just need them to appreciate them. Anybody have any questions about anything that I've covered or haven't covered? Or? Okay, that either means that I'm covering everything or everybody's gone.
It's fascinating.
Well, I hope so.
We're totally enamored of your work, and we have nothing to say. We're sucking it in like straws.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
With straws.
Rich, I'm just intrigued. I'm intrigued by the way you dealt with the clouds, starting with the white mass and adding in the sky, because I'm fascinated by painting clouds. Now, are you going to go back in, did you say, and accent those more, lighten them up, darken them up?
I am. I want, so they're going to, even though the focal area is going to end up right here, and a focal, people say focal point, and I think sometimes that makes novices think that it's a specific item in the painting that's the focal point. That's why I prefer focal area. But it means the same thing. It doesn't have to be just this tree. It's really going to be the interaction between this line of flowers, which is not done, but between this bright yellow stuff here and this dark tree. It's going to be right in here. But I also want some other areas that are pulling you away just for a visit, not to dominate, but just kind of for a visit. And so to that end, I want to put some light up here. And since I don't believe there's actually any white in nature, I'm going to use a very pale pink.
Next time you dip for paint, maybe someone asked to see your painting reference again.
Sure. So now, just like there's a focal point in the painting or a focal area in the painting, with each shape, you've got to have a dominant spot and some that are subordinate. So I'll put some thicker light up here, and then over here, I'll push it into that established gray stuff so that there's some light, but it's not as bright as this over here. But every little bit of light that I add here, it adds a little bit of contour to the clouds, and some, you know, there's parts that are coming forward because they're a little bit lighter. There's parts that are receding. And I can play around endlessly with this sort of thing here. And once you have the cloud forms established, you really can play with, you know, the light and shadow as much as you like, as long as it's a consistent light source that's being shown. So let me grab the reference. Okay, so this is, can you see this okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so again, up here, it reads as, people will say it's white, but if one was to look at it, it's not white, it's a pale pink. And there are a couple of things that make that useful. One of them is that it's not as boring a painting, because people like color. Even if it's subtle like that, it does make a difference. If it was just white, it would not read the same, and it doesn't look natural that way. So I've got this pale pink that I'm getting on the, again, it's at the very tips of my bristles. And I'll use the corner of the brush pretty much to lay it down wherever I need it. And then this part up here, I want to really make it stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to get a little thicker strokes right up there. And of course, thicker strokes means more opacity. And it's going to read like more light is hitting up there. And sometimes you've got light coming through, hitting the edges of these cloud forms. But you don't want to outline everything with that light color, because again, it'll look too contrived. I'm going to be doing a series of short instructional videos in the next couple of weeks on things like, instead of doing a whole painting, I'll be doing things like, you know, tips on painting trees, tips on painting clouds, rocks, curves, all that kind of thing. Because there's different ways to handle all of them. Some are more effective than others. But this is starting to round into some kind of shape here. So I'm going to leave that for now, and I'm going to come back to the foreground.
Rich, will those short teaching videos be available somewhere?
Yeah. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with there's a platform called locals.com. It's pretty new. It's kind of like YouTube. And I've got a subscription channel on there. So if you go to locals.com and then look for a page called Artscapes, it'll bring you to a bunch of my little instructional videos. Some of them are free. Some of them you have to be a subscriber. The subscription is only $10 a month. And what you get is these little tutorials, but also there's going to be just discussions about art. I know some people, you know, and look, everybody's at a different place in their journey. Some people just want to know what colors to mix to get green, and that's fine. Other people want to talk about, you know, like, I don't know, Immanuel Kant's treatise on beauty and aesthetic, right? I mean, they want to get real deep in the weeds. The use of fractals in painting and physics. And I love that stuff. As I said, I have a science background, and I love philosophy, and I really find useful information in those fields that help me paint better. So there'll be discussions about that kind of thing. I even want to do critiques for folks if they're interested in it. So where they would, you know, send me one of their paintings and I critique it for them. And like I said, it's $10 a month, but there are some free things on there. And if anybody's interested, there's all. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I think someone's not muted, but what was the second part after it was locals.com?
So
I've
you
got
know
that
what? That's
in the
you know,
chat.
you're
I'm
far
looking
ahead of
to
me. I'm putting those off
mute
like
the
a
other
lot, like a
person.
lot of other things. I've
Sorry about that.
gotten good
I'm
at
not
putting
it
off.
here. Oh, looking for mute. But what was the second part of what you had said?
So when you go to locals.com, then you
Yes.
look for, my channel is called Artscapes.
artscapes, like landscape, but artscapes.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, right. And there's
That part.
that's the part. And there's also
And
there's a
I guess,
website.
I just assume your brain and my brain are connecting without necessarily having to use words, so.
So I'm missing seeing who's not muted. And if you
Catherine?
could-
Catherine,
Catherine,
Hanny.
okay.
Boy, it makes it a lot bigger of a
looking.
trip for you, because in order for it to work without feeling
I
pressed.
found her. Thank you.
So there's also a website called openstudio.com. And that's run by a lady named Shiona Kennemer in Colorado. And what she's done is she's taken a number of different artists and had them submit tutorials of various lengths. And you can go to that site and, like, for instance, I have one on painting Half Dome at Yosemite, and another one painting a desert area out near where I live, where it's the full painting start to finish, and an explanation of why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I think those are like $25 a piece if you want to watch the full painting start to finish. And then the neat thing about that is that if somebody chooses, they can then do a painting they get the reference photo and they get to do their own version of it. And if they'd like, they can have the artist, whether it's me or somebody else whose work they are doing or copying, they can have that artist critique their painting directly, just one-on-one. So that's kind of a neat thing. And it's very inexpensive, for that sort of thing. So openstudio.com, and then mine is locals.com artscapes. Okay, so I want to start working on this. I put this green in earlier to make the point of how it should sound when you're laying paint on top, but that's really more than I wanted there. So I'm going to work into that. That's the beautiful thing about oil paint. Nothing is permanent until you want it to be. Now, when you have a hillside like this, it's just covered with, random grasses and wildflowers and patches of dirt, really, it's just about identifying the values and the temperatures of what's going on there. And making direct strokes. If I painted every single little flower that was on this hillside, it would take me a lifetime. It would bore me to tears. So I do want to get some shadows at the base of these scrub oaks. That's another one of the videos that I'll be doing, is how to paint shadows, because as you know, there's a difference between form shadows and cast shadows and what they do as far as the physics of light. Mixing up a purpley color here. Okay, so if my light is coming basically somewhat behind and from the right there, then at the base of this, I'm going to have some darks. Now, I'm using a purple color because I want to get the value dark enough, but I can go back into that and add some of the local color of the ground cover that's there, and it'll work out fine. And when I paint shadows, whether they're form shadows or cast shadows, I almost always start with a purple that's darker than it needs to be. Because as we were talking about earlier, with oil, you start dark and you can lighten it up, and it's a lot easier than going the other way. Now, another thing that I like to try and think of, I like to have variety in all aspects of my painting. And sometimes what that'll mean is And I know you've all seen paintings like this. If you looked at Richard Schmid's work, you've seen it a lot, where near the focal area, there'll be thicker paint. And then as you move out to the periphery, sometimes there's bare canvas. You know, sometimes it's just very almost toned, very sparse looking brush marks. You know, for me, that works fine. Nothing says look over here like not completing this area, you know. So it depends on how you want to do it. But I have no problem just making broad strokes on a ground plane that represent, because again, I'm not trying to paint a photorealistic piece. So if I paint a broad stroke here that's just meant to represent a patch of dirt or something, I don't feel the need to explain any more than that necessarily. And when this is looser and it gets tighter as you get to the focal area, that helps us experience the painting the way we would experience it in nature without the periphery being in high definition. Now, when I get in these shadow areas at the bases of these trees, you know, unless you're in a garden where the grass has been freshly mowed, you're going to have little bits of grass popping up, and even though it's in shadow, they're visible. So I'm going to go in there, and this needs to be a little bit darker. So once I've got that, I'm going to take some version of this grass color, see if I've got it right here. And you want to get these blades of grasses that are coming up, and they're kind of random and chaotic. You know, it's not orchestrated and ordered. So rather than make little lines that come up for individual blades of grass, I'm just going to use the edge of my brush. I'll lay the paint down and then just kind of flick it up, kind of randomly. And usually that does a fairly good job. And I got this little bit here that I didn't want there, but that's fine. Get rid of that. Usually that'll do a pretty good job of indicating some of the stuff that's there. Now, if that shadowed stuff is doing that, it stands to reason that there's some of the grasses or flowers in front would be doing that as well. So here you've got slightly lighter stuff going up into the darker stuff, and it's a shadow within a shadow, so it's very slightly lighter. But out here, where you've got this light stuff, it stands to reason that that would be doing things too. And if I keep this edge too sharp, it's going to draw attention in a part of the painting where I don't really want a lot of attention. So this is a fairly easy way to get it to read the way you want. Now I'm going to take some thicker paint. I'm really going to start piling up the paint for this mustard that grows here. And this is almost straight cad yellow here. It's very thick, and that's fine. But I have to think of even this, I'm thinking in terms of shapes, and I want them to be interesting shapes. I want to concentrate it here, but there will be some of it coming up to other parts of this hill. There'll be a little bit of over here. But if I keep it thickest here and make it kind of a more interesting shape than just a line, I think that's going to benefit the piece. And it's subtle, but you might notice that the most intense yellow is right in here. It's less so at this end, less so over here, here, and here. So it helps draw the focus right in there. Now, on this particular hillside, it was actually right near the border of some private property. And so there were these little rusted metal fence posts. And I'm going to kind of hurry up because I don't want to run out of time here before getting to this part. So again, there's an opportunity again to impart some rhythm to this. So if I say, well, I'm going to put some of these little fence posts in. I have something there, maybe something down here. This one over here, I want going a different direction because I don't want them all being too much the same. So what you'll notice is that there's different distances between them and they're leaning in different directions. And it's just more interesting than if I had had them, you know, these staccato, equidistantly spaced things. It's a more interesting rhythm, and that's what I'm going to go with there. Light's coming from here, so there's going to be a bit of a shadow coming down the hillside. I'll have to make that look like it's in grass, but that's doable. And the thing that these do is that it pulls them into the foreground, pulls the foreground forward, I should say. So you get more space. And this spot right in here in the midground, it's a little boring right now. Not much happening. And it's a smaller spot, so I don't have to do too much, but I do want to sort of break it up a little bit. And all I need to do for that is put a suggestion of some other greenery that's a little bit darker than and it might be just, you know, little fields of sagebrush or who knows. And again, you got to be careful. You don't want to divide it so that it's divided in half. And I don't want it so dark and light, so contrasty that it's garnering too much attention. And who knows what it is? It doesn't matter. It's bushes, trees, whatever. It's in the distance and it's not terribly important. I just don't want this one shape to be, you know, uniform color and value. So there's a lot of work still to be done up here in this tree. But again, I don't want it to be too bright because one of the things I like about these cloudy days is, to me, it seems like there's a sense of poetry about them. And I like that. It's like one of my favorite times to paint at the beach, at the coast, is on cloudy, overcast days for the same reason. There's a poetry that's not there in the bright sun. Now, when it comes to just a quick thing about trees, because the light source is the sky, I find that if I take some of the sky color, whatever it be, whether it's the gray of the clouds or maybe the blue of the sky, and mix that in with whatever I'm using for the light on the tree. So the paint that's on my brush right now, this mix of chromatic black and cad lemon, if I go into that and I add a little of the gray that I used for the sky, what it's going to do is it's going to subdue the color just a little bit, and it will act like light from the sky reflecting off the top, the top facing bunches of leaves on this tree. So instead of it being this hot yellow or relatively hot yellow, if I put a little of that sky color in those greens, not in the ones that are facing this way or directly towards me, but the ones that are facing skyward, what I can do is make that look like those leaves are reflecting some of the sky color back up. And it actually helps turn the form. On a tree like this, it's not as noticeable, but if you've got a big cottonwood or, you know, in summer, that's big, great round green form, or pine boughs that are real thick, when you do this, it actually helps turn the form so they don't look like they're cut out and pasted on. And then you soften the edges and it ends up looking more believable, in my opinion. So it's kind of a light gray green that ends up there. And again, only on the masses of leaves that are facing skyward. And then what do we got? Well, we've only got a few more minutes. And I don't know what your schedule is. I'm happy. I'm not trying to rush away. I just don't know if you guys are real strict about the hour and a half thing. But I want to get some sky holes in real quickly.
You know, I think if you would like to continue, please feel free to go ahead. And those people who need to leave will just leave quietly. But
Yeah.
I'm just seeing here, people are very appreciative of the demo today.
Oh,
And
great. I'm happy about that.
could you say one more time where your home base is?
Yeah, I actually live in Palmdale. California, which where are you guys? Where's it's CCAA?
Oh, Monterey, basically, Monterey Peninsula area.
Okay, yeah. So I'm down in the high desert north of Los Angeles. I'm separated from the LA basin by the San Gabriel Mountains, which I like very much. It's a lot less congested and it's a lot prettier here. But yeah, so let me get some sky holes in here. So here I'm going to have, this is mostly clouds, so I'm going to get some of that sky color that I had. And the basic rule with respect to sky holes is it's like a camera aperture. The more it's open, the more light comes through. The smaller the opening in the trees in this case, the less light will come through. So if I take some of this sky color, say, well, I'm going to put some there. If they're small holes, I want to keep them darker than the clouds that are behind the tree. Because as I said, it's a smaller opening, there's less light coming through. Now, if I have an area where there's a lot of space between leaves, branches, that's going to be lighter because more light's coming through. Now, the other thing about doing this is that it allows me to start painting some of the branches that are in there without actually painting branches. So I put sky holes on either side of a piece of what was foliage, and suddenly you got a suggestion of a branch coming through there. And you want to be careful about not going crazy. You know, a lot of times people start doing this and go, oh, that looks really nice. Oh, that looks, and they keep doing it until all of a sudden they've basically disintegrated this form. They've broken it up too much. So, you know, 2 or 3, a big one, a couple small ones, you know, you have to be judicious about that. And the reason I say this is that at the beginning, remember, we're trying to find 4 to 7 basic shapes that work well together. So the point that I want to make is that when I have those 4 to 7 shapes laid out, then I start adding information to them throughout the painting process. And by the end of it, and we're not at the end, but we're getting pretty close. At the end of it, those 4 to 7 shapes should still be visible. They should have maintained their integrity. But what happens sometimes is people say, oh, wait, they get seduced by the light. So I want to put some more light here. I want to put some more sky holes. And the next thing you know, this nice dominant shape has been disintegrated. And so you don't want to do that. And you're never going to have as many sky holes on a painting as there is in nature anyway, because they're tiny and infinite. Down here, same thing, except for these aren't actually sky holes, they're mountain holes, I guess you'd say. You know, they still call them sky holes, obviously, but the same.
Rich,
Yes.
can you hear me? I'm going to be doing a virtual demo like you're doing here, and how do you put your camera or your laptop or whatever it is? Is it on a tripod?
Yeah, I've got a little it's basically a camera stand, but it's got a phone attachment on the top of it.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it's just it's a tripod that, you know, telescopes, and pretty simple.
So it's just the camera sitting on a tripod.
Yeah, it's just my phone on a tripod. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Now,
Anyway,
normally
great demo.
Normally I would have a laptop that was doing this part, and my phone, you know, the camera on my phone would be looking at my palette, but my laptop is not cooperating today. So
yeah, no, it's working great. You know, it looks good.
Oh, good. Glad to hear it. So yeah, over here we got to get some sky holes in there, and you're basically looking for something that approximates the color of that mountain back there. And as I said, if they're big holes, they should be about the same value as the mountain. If they're smaller, they should be slightly darker. And just don't make too many of them, because it doesn't improve. And, you know, you can play around, and typically I'll make a bunch of them the way I want, and then I'll go back and take a couple of them out. But I just want to get to show you the process. Now that's up here, but this part of this scrub oak is in front of this mid-ground plane that's got this kind of pale green stuff going on. So we got to make sure it looks proper.
Could you repeat the colors on your palette again, please?
Yeah, I use titanium white, cad red light, cad lemon, and ultramarine, and then usually chromatic black, and sometimes depending on, like if I'm painting the poppies this spring, I'm hoping we have some poppies. I live near the California Poppy Reserve, and you know, you can approximate that color with other colors, but nothing does it like cad orange. So I'll use that. Yeah, and I like the limited palette because it just you end up with more natural looking paintings, in my opinion. So, you know, it depends on what kind of look you're going for, obviously. So here we go. All right. So essentially, I can finish back here, but we're getting pretty close to the point where I would leave it alone for a couple of days. And the reason for that is, you know, when you're staring at a painting for, in this case, an hour and a half, or you know, whatever it is, it's easy to lose objectivity. And sometimes I'll think it's going real well, and then my wife will come in and take a look, and she'll go, "Well, that tree looks like Mickey Mouse," and I didn't even see it, you know. So at this point, and what you guys can't see is that I have opposite this canvas on the far end of my studio, I have a full-size mirror on the whole wall. So I can keep looking back to see if and it just distorts it enough that I can see if the composition is working well. Because staring at it for a prolonged amount of time, you really do lose objectivity sometimes. Okay, I'm going to, this needs to be darker, especially on the back side of it, too simplified as it is. So I'm happy to say that I'm not able in an hour and a half to share everything I've ever learned about painting. That would be sad. But if there's any questions that anybody has about anything specifically that I have covered or haven't, now would probably be a good time.
Please feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question.
I don't have a question, Rich. I just want to say it was so much fun watching the magic happen there.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that greatly. I tease my students sometimes and tell them I'm not very smart because I keep being amazed by the same thing over and over again. And what I mean is it's the process, you know. From time to time, somebody will say something really flattering, you know, "Oh, you have a gift," that sort of thing. And I try to be very gracious about it. But the truth of the matter is I don't believe they understand what the gift is. It's not something that comes from me. It's that I get to do this. And the thing about painting, whether you're a still life artist or a figurative artist, or portraiture, whatever your subject matter is, my thinking is in order for us to learn how to do this really well, we have to observe things at a level that is well beyond what most people observe things at. In other words, if you're driving down the street and you see this brown thing with a bunch of green things hanging off of it, you know, you go into survival mode, well, that's a tree, don't drive the car into it. But if you're going to paint it, you have to take in a lot more information than that. And, you know, the negative shapes and the subtle color and temperature variations and the edge quality, all that stuff. And I think what it does is it means that those of us who paint, we get to, you know, appreciate the world at a much deeper level than most people do. And that's the gift, you know. So I appreciate your comments very much. I'm lucky to be.
What you say is so inspiring, and I want to like hang out with you for a week.
Well,
Want to sit down with a cup of coffee or a cocktail?
Well, I'll
The
tell you
things
what,
say are really, really resonate. I think with me personally, but I think as with artists, you put them in words so eloquently. It's just lovely. Thank you.
my pleasure. Thank you very much. So one of the things that I do with every workshop I teach, every demo I do, because as I mentioned before, I like to collect artist friends. My contact information. Yeah, no, my contact information is online. You can go to my website and send me an email. My phone, I believe my phone number is on my Facebook page. So honestly, any of you, if you ever want to talk art, email me, call me, whatever. If I'm busy at the moment, I've got 2 teenagers and,
I'm
homework to
sorry.
help them with and all that.
I'm sorry about that.
But I'll get back to you because I hope that you can tell I love talking about art and painting and it's been a blessing in my life.
It shows. Thank you. It elevates us.
Well, see, now that's the best thing anybody can say. We all have our own ideas, I think, in society, what is art and what is not. And I don't want to be the arbiter of that. I'm not qualified to be, but I do think we should all have our own standard. And in my case, I believe that if anything is art, then nothing is art. And so for myself, I know that there's commercial art and there's political art and there's all this other stuff. There's shock art. For me, if it doesn't elevate spiritually, if it doesn't make us appreciate beauty, it's not working for me.
Buddy, I love you. You're great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that more than I can say.
Rich, you'll be sending us the painting finished.
Absolutely.
And then any other information you care to, send along. I've shared your website in the chat, and I've also shared, the other thing you had said, a few things. So if you would like to share anything else, please feel free. I think there's an interest. I mean, here, what's with Zoom? We're not bound. We're not.
I know it's really pretty amazing. Like I said, I've got students that came to my Taos art school workshops 10 years ago, and I haven't seen them since until this started. And now they're taking lessons from me online. Mm-hmm. And it's a great thing. So I'll be happy. As soon as I finish it, I'll take a nice picture of it and send it to you so you can show everybody else. And like I said, this is a sincere offer, folks. I love talking about art. So hit me up. It's not a problem.
Rich, does your classes, I know you're painting in oil, can they translate to acrylic?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are going to be a few different things as far as, handling the brushes, washing the brushes and how you thin the paint and all that kind of stuff. But I usually have 1 or 2 watercolorists that actually come to my out-of-state classes as well.
Using watercolor?
Oh yeah. And the reason is because most of the information, it transcends the medium.
Yes.
You talk about how to observe things accurately, and you talk about, edge work and temperature and everything that goes into it. There are very few things that are limited by the medium. Now, the only caveat to that is I don't claim to be an expert in watercolor. So if somebody's looking for that.
Yeah, color shape form, it's okay.
Yeah. But yeah, feel free if I'm doing a class and you want to be involved, don't let that stop you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Well, to those of you whose faces I got to see tonight, thank you very much. And to those of you who I didn't and you're there, thank you for being here. I hope that you found this informative and helpful.
Very much so. And I'm muted because my dogs are barking. But thank you so.
Okay.
Oh, they stopped just for that. Hallelujah. But thank you so much. And
my pleasure.
You also take out students painting, don't you, from time to time, and even doing the
Yeah, I do. I do paint outs anytime I can find an excuse. Every year on my birthday, I have a bunch of artists go out to paint. Usually we get 25 or so people out, some beautiful place to paint. I do workshops in the Sierra, usually once a year. I've done, for 8 years, I taught workshops for the Taos Art School, and that was in New Mexico. I've taught in Hawaii, I've taught in Alaska, wherever I can. It's a great excuse to travel and see beautiful places, right? So Right now I have 3 private students that I go out with during the week, for 4 hours at a time and just instruct one-on-one. Yeah, it's a great gig. I mean, I don't know how I got this lucky, to be honest with you.
I think it's time you came and painted Point Lobos.
That would be okay with me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's kind of fun. We could do a workshop here.
Yeah.
If there's enough people that are wanting that, I would be more than happy to do something like that. It's a gorgeous area, and the last time I drove through there, I was the one at the wheel. My family was the one getting to see all the pretty scenery. I had to actually watch the road, so it was a little bit of torture, to be honest, because I couldn't stop and paint everywhere.
Watching the road is a good plan there.
Yes, it was. We made it. So no,
We'll be in touch about that. We're going to be in touch about that. So thank you.
That would be wonderful. I'd do it at the drop of a hat. Yeah. And if any of you want to sign up for my newsletter, go to my website and you can sign up through that. And that way you can keep abreast of what I'm doing and where I'm going to be and that kind of thing, if you're interested.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. I don't want to keep you super long here. So thank you so much. And
I actually have another Zoom meeting at 7 o'clock. So
you got to eat.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much, folks. God bless you all. Take care.
Thank you.